If you're doing something illegal and you're making $300 million off of that activity and you only get fined $100 million, what did that teach you? There needs to be more oversight. There should be people, mainly collectors, speculators, and investors, coming at those companies with pitchforks and torches drawn. The little Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters, they have an emotional attachment to these items. They're instead defending the grading companies and auction companies because they somehow think that they're their friends.
All right, well, we are back again with Shawn from Reserved Investments, here to hit us in the face with a stale donut. Shawn, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for hopping on the channel.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, you had an article that came out the other week from Antiques and Auction News that you wrote, as well as a video kind of following up with it. And I wanted to start by reading what you wrote, at least in the first couple lines of that article, and then maybe I can hand it off to you to go into the conversation. But you wrote, I have long argued that the antiques and collectible trade no longer belongs to the average collector or enthusiast. Auction companies and third-party grading companies now control these markets with an iron fist. The collecting categories that these companies choose to promote vastly influence both collectors and investors' tastes, who now view these markets as valid alternative asset classes. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think anymore we've pivoted away from where we were in the trade, going back like to the 1960s, 70s, and even the early 80s. It used to be that collectors and enthusiasts really drove these markets. It was whatever was hot had a nostalgic pull, and there wasn't as much money flowing through these markets as there are today. You've always had some top tier auction houses controlling these markets. Let's be realistic. Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips, Bonhams. These are auction houses that are hundreds of years of age or more. So these are auction houses that do control the trade. But it was always at least at the benefit of top tier collectors, where top tier collectors would be steering the ship. Now we're in this era where there's so much money moving into the antiques and collectibles trade behind the scenes that it's more the auction companies and grading companies are in control. And all is what they're doing is they're pulling on the strings of nostalgia, and they're getting, I hate to say this, a lot of the Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters excited for these items. Then they're using terms like investment grade or historic, and they're kind of pumping up these items that can now be seen as alternate asset classes. And that's where this gets dangerous. That's where we're kind of in some uncharted territory here.
And are you saying that this is kind of different than, say, in the past when we had like an Overstreet price guide or a Wizard magazine that would say, like, here's kind of like your hottest comic books, for instance? Like this has now been put on steroids because of the like sort of institutional, money and power that these auction houses have?
Correct. Because when we look at the Overstreet price guide, the one thing that I'll give Bob Overstreet a lot of credit for early on, there were dealers that would kind of try to take advantage of the Overstreet price guide and make it seem like certain comics that really shouldn't be hot were and were not, vice versa. And Bob did a really great thing where he kind of had a knack for seeing if there was any form of, I'm going to use this term rather liberally here, market manipulation going on behind the scenes. So I'm not saying that none of that entered into the Overstreet price guides and what people were thinking about when they were attempting to either speculate, collect, or heaven forbid, invest in comic books back then. But overall, it wasn't as bad as it is today, because now we're talking about pieces that sell for 6-7 figures. This was kind of almost unheard of back in 1970 when Bob Overstreet wrote the very first Overstreet comic book price guide. Even in the 1990s, during the bubble, there weren't really that many comic books that hit the 6-figure range, let alone the 7-figure range. You didn't have a lot of auction companies like Heritage. You didn't have CGC at the helm driving the grading of these books. And I want to make this very clear. I'm not putting the blame entirely on auction companies and grading companies. They're really, in the purest form, they're not doing anything wrong. They're providing a service, a much needed service. My problem is, though, when we start looking at the dark money, the private equity groups that are buying up these companies, they know what they're doing. They know how to market this stuff to the masses and try to, how do I want to say this, market it as an investment. That's why also in that article that I wrote, there's a piece where there's an excellent article that premiered on www.cllct, I think it is, collect.com. And it talks about how the antiques and collectibles trade is estimated to grow from $600 billion, which is what it's at now, to almost $1 trillion by the year 2033, which is roughly 9 years from now. If that happens, that represents a 40% increase in the amount of money that is moving in these markets just from collectors, speculators, and investors alone. All is what I'm saying is there really is no one left to protect the little guy. And my critics may state, well, it's up to the little guy to think about before he or she decides to invest in these markets. The problem is we've gotten to the point where investing, speculating, and collecting are all intertwined. There's no way to separate them at this point. The auction houses and grading company have pretty much made that a guaranteed thing. So that's where I'm alerting a lot of people to the fact that there should be some type of regulation in these markets, as unpopular as that term is in the year 2024.
Right, right. Do you dare insinuate that the people who are putting private equity into the business of collectibles aren't expecting for it to grow and have this return?
Well, I do anticipate that they're well aware. The problem
I'm,
is,
I'm
though,
teasing, I'm teasing a bit. I'm teasing
I
a
know,
bit.
I know, but they're guiding the ship too. That's the
Yeah.
problem. It's you literally have the the foxes are running the hen house. That's
Mm.
really what's happening, where they know what's going on. Like they're pumping this up through the grading companies and the auction houses. We're using terms historic, investment grade, one of a kind. Don't miss your chance to own this. It's almost like it's being promoted as an investment. Now I get it. There is a fine line between hype, market manipulation, and of course, just good old fashioned marketing, right? But I really think that if we're taking this to the next level, where a lot of people are now starting to say, hey, I have a pretty comfortable net worth. I want to put like 1/10 or 20% or haven't put 30, 40, 50% of my net worth in antiques and collectibles. I think the government needs to at least be aware of this. And there should be some more regulation than what there is. One of the things that most people are not aware, shill bidding is not illegal if it's disclosed in an auction contract. And most people don't even know how to look for it because it's not called shill bidding. That's what
Right.
makes this very complex. You're going on an auction site and you think that you're bidding up against another hardcore investor or collector who wants these items just as much as you, when in all actuality, I hate to say this, in certain cases, you could be bidding right against the auction house, against your very own interests. The item, when these items sell, it does not mean that they are worth the price that they are selling for at auction. It just means at that point in time, somebody was willing to pay that price. And because all this information is private, we don't even know who that individual was. Even if it was, I hate to say this, the auction house or somebody that represents even another auction house that bidded up that item and bought it. So this is like Wall Street times 10. People attack me because on my channel at least, I recommend instead of investing in antiques and collectibles, before you get invested in any of these markets, you should be well diversified in financial assets. And I always get comments, I don't want to give my money to those Wall Street crooks. If you think Wall Street's bad, you should see what goes on behind the scenes in the antiques and collectibles trade. And I encourage everybody, if you want proof, just read the book, Killer Stuff and Tons of Money. That's an excellent book that takes you behind the scenes and it explains the history of auction houses. Some auction houses, yes, they're very ethical, they're very honest. Others, though, have blurred the lines of ethics, especially as of late. Don't get me started on the graded video game bubble. What happened there? Because there was a lot of alleged manipulation going on behind the scenes. And in all honesty, I would love to say that it wasn't alleged, but there is a lawsuit out there. So I am being very careful. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. But when somebody goes on Pawn Stars and they represent a grading company, and they're also claiming they represent the seller of that item that they just graded, that's a major conflict of interest in the trade. You can't dispute that. Whether or not it's illegal, I'm not a lawyer. That's not for me to discuss. But what I can tell you is it's highly unethical.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, it doesn't necessarily have to be that there's some, cabal or, grand conspiracy of people that are, actually manipulating things rather than if you just point to sort of the incentives, they'll guide what people decide to do in this market. So if people are, trying to make money or they have an item that they have a particular, interest in because they have, more copies or, other versions of it that they want to sell, then yeah, they might do some things that are certainly skirting that line of market manipulation. One of the things that I think was really interesting was I've heard so many different stories, and I'm sure you have as well, of people that will bid up an item, on a fake account, and they'll just not pay for that item. That ends up getting recorded into, say, like a GPA for a day or two before they can actually scrub it. But then if they go onto the, their whatnot sale, or they have their auction, or whatever other thing, and they say, wow, like I can't believe this ASM 300 sold for this much. Here, I have this copy, and I'll do it for $1,000 less. And so it doesn't take much, to do it, even if it's not on this level of like an auction house doing it. I mean, there's just so many individuals that can do it. But to get to the point of your article, the problem becomes when you have the big players that are really putting their hands in this, and that's really what you have issue with. Tell me about this private equity stuff as it's coming in, and maybe the people that are watching, and you can kind of just sort of recap a little bit what were you saying in the article. Like, is this just something where there's big business has had its eyes on collectibles, and now everyone is, kind of seeing this as a bit of a gold rush? And a little bit of an aside, I think is really interesting, is that, even someone who has a YouTube channel, and I'm sure, you might have had some of these experiences before. I've definitely gotten a lot of offers for sponsorship on my channel, just people asking about like, hey, we're trying to do fractional ownership of,
Yep.
this type of collectible and all this stuff, and we'd love you to, talk about it or promote it and things like that. But yeah, I guess I say all that to say this, is that there's just a lot of, private money that is coming in, and a lot of interesting companies that are trying to do big business here. What's your sort of your thought on that?
I think it used to be, and this is what I mean when I say private equity, because you're right. I don't think a lot of people understand what I mean here. There used to be a time when certain companies, auction companies and grading companies, were publicly traded companies on the stock exchange. Case in point, Collectors Universe. Collectors Universe owns such companies as PSA, PCGS Coin Grading, PCGS Banknote, and they also now own Wada Games, which grades video games, among other related media. There was a time where they used to trade on the stock exchange. I think it was the NASDAQ. And what happened was private equity came in and they delisted the shares. They privatized the organization. Now, let me explain why that's bad. When a company is listed on any public exchange, meaning you can purchase, any individual, any what we call retail investor can go to the stock market and purchase shares in that company. Those companies are required by law, by the SEC itself, that they have to put out either a quarterly or an annual report that talks about earnings, that talks about how much money they made and what's coming in the pipeline. Where are they spending that money on? Where are their biggest sales coming from? For instance, if we're talking Collectors Universe, is their biggest money maker at present time? Is it PSA? Is it PCGS for coins? Is it Wada Games? What division is growing the most, and what is coming in the pipeline? Where are they spending their profits on? That information can give somebody who is an investor in these markets an edge just by reading that annual report. The same thing's true at a certain point in time. A lot of the major auction companies, I shouldn't say a lot, but Christie's and Sotheby's were once publicly traded companies. A lot of people don't realize this. So you could get a copy of their quarterly report or annual report, and you could see, oh, it looks like art. That market has grown by leaps and bounds. I'm reading this. They made $100 million just from the sale of art last quarter alone, or whatever it is. So this would give you a lot of insight into how these markets are moving, and it would kind of provide you with a glimpse behind the scenes. Well, of course, private equity came in and said, why are we going to be beholden to Wall Street? We can make these companies private. We can take them behind the scenes. We can do what we want with them. And investors are flushing them with cash. You have the billionaire class, the elites, all investing in this. And nothing's really released publicly. Now, this is where my critics are going to hammer me, and they're going to say, well, Shawn, that's capitalism. People have a right to private ownership. I don't dispute that. There's tons of local auction houses. There's entrepreneurs that own auction houses. No problem there with private ownership. My problem is when you have 5 major auction houses that control the entire antiques and collectibles trade with an iron fist, along with roughly 4 premier dominant grading conglomerates. We have a problem here. There could be, and this is how I'm going to word this, there could be a lot of collusion going on between these enterprises behind the scenes that we are not privy to. And in fact, I can tell you that's most likely what is happening in certain cases. I'm not going to say that everything's a conspiracy. And if you go on Heritage or whatever auction site that you fancy, whether it's Heritage, Hakes, more, whatever, and you see a book selling, like we'll use comic books as an example, for record price. I'm not saying there's some hanky-panky going on behind the scenes. But what I'm saying is there's no transparency anymore. It was never this bad. I don't know if you're aware of this. I think I mentioned it in the article that I wrote. Jay-Z owns a portion of CGC, the Certified Collectibles Group. I mean, that's just insane to me that someone who made his money in music became very successful. Don't get me wrong. He earned his success. I love some of his music too. He's married to Beyonce. He probably has a great life. But for him to be able to come in and put a massive amount of money in the Certified Collectibles Group should raise the eyebrows of anyone that's watching this and is viewing these markets as quote unquote investable. We even have YouTubers now. I do have to bring this up. There are prominent YouTubers out there that have gotten massive success into the stratosphere. And what are they doing with their fame and money? They're putting it in grading companies. They want to buy up auction companies. That's the next thing on their list. And it's creating a pool of dark money and uncertainty in these markets. How many card grading companies do we need? How many comic book grading companies do we need? Now, to be fair, CGC really doesn't have any competition. They're going to hit their first major competitor with PSA, most likely. Let's be realistic. In 2025, we're going to have to see how that goes. But look at video games. You have Wada Games, you have VGA, you have CGC, and you have a plethora of upstarts that most people have never even heard of that are either entering the market or exiting the market that are all competing for a piece of this pie. If you're an investor looking at this market, especially when some of these companies use different grading scales, how do you analyze these markets properly for investment? And this is what I mean. Everybody comes to me, and I'm speaking from my experience just on YouTube with reserved investments. And when I first started out, people would attack me, like claiming that I don't understand these markets or I don't know what I'm doing. And it's very interesting because I would have conversations with these people. Like if you look at the grading scale, talking about video games, the grading scale that VGA uses is completely different from the grading scale that Wada Games and CGC uses to grade video games. So if you're not aware that a VGA 85, which translates to near mint plus, that is not equivalent to a Wada Games 8.5 or 9.0. The VGA game with near mint plus, because of their grading scale, is actually higher at an 85 than a Wada Games 9.0 or 9.2. How can you invest in these markets if you don't have that knowledge? And that's why there kind of needs to be some level. If we're not going to call it regulation, there has to be some agreed upon decorum, because Lord knows auction companies, believe it or not, are regulated. You have to be licensed in most states, not all, to get an auctioneer's license. So I want to point that out. But the problem is it doesn't go far enough.
I'm going to ask you a question that clearly I know the answer for, but I think it's important to kind of put it out there. Why is transparency good? Why do we need transparency? Sure. And let me, sorry, one other little thing. Can auction houses and collectible dealers or, sites or whatever that kind of thrive on proprietary knowledge in a way, could you ever see them being in a world where they want full transparency?
And I want to be clear here. There's a difference between transparency and full transparency. I'm not asking for them to release their client list. Like, I wouldn't be comfortable if I went to Heritage or Morphe's Auctions or Hakes, and let's say that I paid just even like $10,000 for something. I would not be comfortable if they said, hey, Shawn of Reserved Investments bought that. Well, if I didn't
Mhm.
want that out there, I have that right. Just like I can go put $10,000 in an S&P 500 index fund, Vanguard doesn't put a notice out that Reserved Investments of YouTube fame, Shawn, put $10,000 in an S&P 500 index fund. So I'm not against some type of limited disclosure, or what I want to say is limited transparency.
Mm.
My problem is there's no transparency. Now, to answer your first question, why is transparency good? Well, look at what happened with the Bitcoin scandal, with FTX, with Celsius.
Mm.
There was no transparency there. There was no regulations. And when I came on YouTube, I used to warn people, I still to this day do not like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. I refuse to own any of them because of the lack of regulation in the market. And I used to have people argue with me, well, Shawn, you're wrong. I'm putting my money with Celsius, FTX. They're paying me a dividend to put my money in there. And I have to explain to these people, there's no underlying cash flows. How are you getting a dividend? The only way you can get a dividend from cryptocurrency is the person that you're investing with is speculating with your money on more cryptocurrency, or the other way, they're attempting to mine additional cryptocurrency that they are giving you a cut of. At some point, it's going to end. It's almost anybody with a financial education can tell you that is almost the very definition of a Ponzi scheme. So someone like me, I put my money in financial assets, whether it be traditionally index funds, mutual funds, ETFs. Then I diversify a little bit, individual stocks I'm not too bullish on, but I do invest in individual stocks and, of course, individual bonds. But overall, could you imagine if I put my money in Vanguard and there was no regulation, there was no transparency, and Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, Charles Schwab took my money? That would be insane. It's regulation and transparency that keeps those markets honest and afloat. Now, to be fair to the people out there that look at all these news headlines with insider trading, yes, individual stocks are inherently risky. If you're going to the market, you're going to play the individual stock casino machine thinking that you're going to get rich through day trading. I'm sorry, you're going to get slapped in the face with a stale donut. 97 to 98% of all day traders lose, whereas the opposite is in effect if you invest in an S&P 500 index fund. If you invest in an S&P 500 index fund and keep your money there for 10, 20 years, 97 to 98% of all people make money over the long term. So that's all that I'm asking when we look at the antiques and collectibles trade. If we're going to really view this as an alternate asset class, I think there needs to be more transparency and just a little bit more regulation. We can go all the way back. If you watch my channel, I recommend a lot of the books. Some of them you can see in the background that I recommend people read. What happened with the graded coin bubble in the 1980s is a prime example. Third-party grading was entirely new at that time because coins were the first collectible ever to be third-party graded. And of course, Wall Street had to get involved. Wall Street pumped it up like the next big thing. And Merrill Lynch created the Athena Fund to cater to this market. A lot of Main Street investors who did not even have an interest in coins, antiques, or collectibles ended up investing in the Merrill Lynch Athena Fund. You can actually Google this. And at the end of the day, you can guess what happened. The fund crashed. There was no regulation. The company, Merrill Lynch, was actually buying up overpriced dealer assets, meaning they were going to the market. Dealers were like, look at this. We got Wall Street coming to us. Yo, if this coin's worth $500 or $1,000, these dumbasses, pardon my French, on Wall Street, they'll easily give us $2,000 to $3,000 for this item. So Merrill Lynch had people that didn't know what they were doing in the collectibles range. There was no regulation. Dealers literally ended up taking advantage of the situation. Who got hurt? It was the end consumer, the end investor. And back then in the 80s and 90s, there was more rigorous regulation than there is today. People don't realize that. And what happened was eventually they were nailed by the FTC at that time. The Federal Trade Commission came in on Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch still to this day admits no wrongdoing. But what they did was they gave all the early investors back their principal. They just said, that's how we're going to settle this. And they exited the collectibles trade at that point. If we're going to treat the collectibles trade like Wall Street, what people don't understand is the reason that Wall Street works the way it does, whether or not you agree with it, whether or not maybe you don't understand it, either way, it's due to regulation that causes Wall Street to work the way it does over the long term. And I'm not saying it's perfect. Look at 2008, prime example. 2008, subprime collapse. Obviously, regulation failed, right?
Yeah.
So it's never going to be perfect. What I'm just asking for is just a little bit of transparency. I think a little bit more regulation or required rules coming to fruition through like all these major players where, okay, you want this piece to sell for X millions of dollars, just release more information to us. Make it where there's at least a database that is pretty much financed, pretty much put out there by the major players. That's not manipulated at all. It cannot be manipulated. That people can go to and research this stuff. Just make it a little bit more easier. That's all I'm saying. And I can give you some ideas. But again, this is where we kind of veer off into the kind of the political discussion because some people don't like any talking of regulation or any type of control in these markets, not understanding capitalism is based on control. Capitalism is actually based on anti-monopolistic practices that we've gotten away from. If you read The Wealth of Nations, everybody knows the beginning of the book that talks about the invisible hand that guides markets. The problem is, I usually tell my critics, keep going. Because when you get towards the middle and the end of the book, it starts talking about how you have to have antitrust, anti-monopoly laws to keep markets safe. And unfortunately, in the year 2024, I am going to get a lot of slack for this, but I'm just going to say it. No market is safe. We don't have that. Just look at tech companies. We all know the major tech companies that pretty much control everything in our lives. I mean, I guarantee right now, you have a cell phone. I guarantee it's either an Android or an iPhone. It can't be anything else unless you have a flip phone. Two companies monopolize that market.
Yeah.
And let's be realistic. YouTube's on both of them. Facebook's
Oh, yeah.
on both of them. It's insane. I mean, even the dating sites. If you go on a dating site, there's only like two companies that own every single dating site out there. They just market it under a different name. And people think, oh my gosh, this is great. It's a new dating site. It's all the same. Same people, same faces, same company.
Yeah. I think even the most, first principled capitalist person would still, if you press them, eventually you're going to hit a point where it's like, okay, yeah, you need a little bit of rules. You need a little bit of guidance here because, people will take advantage and as they do in the collectible world. I think it's interesting, with all the money that has come in. I think I know the answer to this question that you're going to
Okay.
say, but with all the money that has come in on the one hand, you might say, hasn't it never been safer to invest, say, in like a collectible or a big time comic book? Because like, look at all the ecosystem that has been created around the industry of collectibles versus what it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. But to a point you said earlier, and actually I did a video on my channel talking about this, that this year in 2024, we have more $1 million comic sales than we actually did in any of the prior years, and technically, 2021, that was like the height, so it's kind of interesting, like how much money is coming into a lot of the comic books, even in the kind of like, more down time right now. But yeah, to that do you think that it's safer in a way that people are putting their money in collectibles now versus say 10 or 20 years ago?
I think you bring up a great point. And this is another controversy opinion that a lot of my critics don't like, but these are on the other side of the proverbial coin.
Mm.
I have long argued that third-party grading is a necessary evil in the antiques and collectibles trade. And I honestly believe third-party grading is not a scam. Third-party grading did a lot of good for these markets. I mean, if we want to talk comic books, I'm sure, I don't know, you're probably around my age. I won't ask your age. I know that's rude, but you're
I'm
probably
41.
somewhere around
Yeah.
my age, right? You probably remember back in the dark ages going to a comic book store and buying back then. I mean, if you were going to spend 50 or $100 on a comic book, that was a lot.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't great. You had to take pretty much the dealer's word. It wasn't restored. It wasn't touched up. There was, the pages were intact. It was in near at least the condition that they stated it was. You had to trust them. Today, at least you have a grading company to fall back on where they did all that work. And I'm not saying they're perfect. Grading is more of an art than that of a science, but we're further ahead than where we were back in the 1990s if you wanted to invest in comic books. As a matter of fact, you can also attribute, I'm sure that you would agree with this, the reason why these items are looked at as investable properties is simply due to the fact that a lot of buyers and sellers have confidence in a company like CGC.
Yeah.
So I want to make this very clear. I have nothing against heritage auctions. I have nothing against any auction company. I have nothing against most top tier grading companies. I've said this before. I think Matt Nelson does an excellent job running the certified collectibles group. And dear God, if he's watching this right now, he probably hates me. But I would back him 100%. I think he's a great guy. I think his heart and mind is in the right place. He's the man for that job. Now that we have all this money flowing into these markets due to that trust, we can't fall back and just say, well, the grading companies are doing what they're supposed to do. Obviously, now the auction companies are as well, because there's instances that we can point to that isn't true. If you really want to Google something and you really want me to get deep here, both Christie's and Sotheby's were involved in a price fixing scheme back in the 1990s, early 2000s, where they were fined heavily, and some of them still, quote unquote, admit no wrongdoing. They just paid the fine and walked away. And this is my problem. If you're raking in close to $1 billion a year and you're doing something illegal or unethical, mostly illegal, because let's face it, you really can't prosecute someone for doing something unethical unless it's also illegal. It has to be against the law. But if you're doing something illegal and you're making $300 million off of that activity and you only get fined $100 million, well, you profited $200 million from that illegal activity. What did that teach you? Well, that teaches me that I'm only going to have to give up a third of my profits. So I might as well keep going in that direction. As long as I have clientele and customers that are looking the other way, I might as well continue that behavior. That's where I think that some of the fines and penalties for auction companies, people in this market, in order to protect the little guy, they need to be increased. There needs to be more oversight. There needs to be somebody sitting at the FTC where all is what they do is examine auction companies. We need to hire more bodies and put them in that role so that if a proposed grading company goes on Pawn Stars and potentially, allegedly, props up the value of the items that they're grading to the point where little Timmy's, Kimmy's, and Poindexters start arguing with me that they're going to put $10,000 on an Amex card and buy a graded video game. And now today, that graded video game is only worth $2,000 because the market crashed. I'm sorry. There needs to be more liability on those companies. There should be people, mainly collectors, speculators, and investors, coming at those companies with pitchforks and torches drawn. Instead, what's happening is the little Timmy's, Kimmy's, and Poindexters, they have an emotional attachment to these items. They're instead defending the grading companies and auction companies because they somehow think that they're their friends.
Yeah.
That's completely unrealistic.
Well,
I don't look at Vanguard when I invest. I don't look at Vanguard as my friend. On wallet, that's completely that's ridiculous.
Well, it's funny because it's like the most influential voices, I think, in a lot of the spaces. Oftentimes, it's the hand that feeds in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So it's hard for a lot of people to criticize this stuff. And just to put a point on the CGC thing, earlier this year they had that kind of reholder situation, and I know there's a lot of people who watch my YouTube and channel, and they are really passionately not for CGC. You'll see the comments grading is a scam, and I try to be really fair. I think that CGC, like you said, does a good service for the people that use it. I think Matt Nelson is a great comic expert, knowledgeable person, and I think that unfortunately he has to be the face of a lot of situations that CGC gets in trouble with. But I just think that it's really hard for people within the space to speak out against a lot of the auction houses or the grading companies or the institutional collectible businesses, because they themselves, if they're in it this far, they themselves have a vested interest in it. I am curious to hear what you think about some of the situations that I find myself in when I'm covering the market and watching comic book sales and stuff. I find it so curious that you'll see some of the same really big books sell within, a calendar year a couple times, or all of a sudden you'll see this one Action Comics that sold here, and then it went to this auction house there, and then it went to that auction house there. And listen, could be that someone bought it and they're like, you know what? Too much money for me. I'm going to sell it. I'll go to the other auction house or whatever. But I wish that there was like a way that you could sort of understand, like, well, who owned that comic book and why is it up for sale again right now? And it's a little bit strange to me that, this item is being relisted when it sold, a year ago and all this. And I guess where I'm going with that, and if I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat, and again, I'm just asking questions, I'm not inferring this. I wonder sometimes, like, if the auction houses are just trading items, with each other, or if there's people who are buying the stuff that are, just dealers and stuff. And actually, that'd be a whole other topic of conversation. How many people that are buying these items are actual collectors versus, if not full-time dealers, part-time dealers, which I think is really interesting. But I'm curious as far as like being able to follow, where some of these items go and why they trade hands and why they turn over every year or 2 years or, 3 years or whatever. Is there a way for us to ever get that sort of transparency?
No,
And does it matter actually for us to know why things get relisted?
I think it should be disclosed if an auction house buys it from another auction house. I
Mm,
honestly think that that should be regulated. I think that there should be some type of disclosure where this came from this you know what I mean? Like, even if
yeah,
they buy it and then they sit on it, so, like, you really can't most people don't think to look at every single auction house to see if it was listed before or when it came up for bid.
right.
But I think honestly that would help tremendously if, like, there was some type of regulation there that said that.
Yeah.
But I can tell you firsthand, to answer your other question, being a consultant in the trade, I do know people do overextend themselves.
Mm,
Sometimes they get excited and they will outbid everybody else, and then they realize, "Oh my gosh, I gotta come up with the money for this." Sometimes too, their wives or significant others may not be aware, and when they do find out, then they have to resell it onto the market. There are also a lot of people that play in this market that speculate in other assets, meaning there's a lot of crypto traders. There is a lot of day traders in stocks that put a portion of their money in collectibles. So if you have this trading mindset, like I've said this, I am totally against the day trading mindset. I don't do anything really unless if it's a sure thing, like meme stocks. I do not touch penny stocks, anything like that. I'm against short term speculation in a lot of these markets for the most part, unless if it's with low value modern era collectibles where you can come into the market. The manufacturers use mass produced scarcity. You can buy them up and you can flip them almost immediately for 2 to 3 times what you paid. You get your quick money and you get out. But there are people that utilize the higher end collectibles marketplace as a roulette table or almost like a casino where they come in and they think immediately they can flip this 6 months later and they're going to make a profit. And I have seen it go both ways. I can tell you the large portion of people that try to play that game, they end up losing. It's like 80% will lose money on the purchase. I can also tell you there's a lot of people in these markets that are addicted to shopping. They have like a buying addiction where they have to keep buying stuff. And when the credit card bill comes, it's like, oh my God, what do I do? Now I'm $30,000 or $40,000 in debt. Well, obviously I got to dump something or I got to dump a few items. And you would think they would learn their lesson because obviously they should be able to do a profit and loss statement and see, okay, I paid 40,000 and I ended up after all said and done selling everything with a $5,000 loss. And now I still owe the credit card company. But there are people that just get addicted to these markets. I hate to say that. And that's why, again, there should be regulation. Now, to be fair, I know what my critics are going to say. Well, Shawn, you can open up a brokerage account and you can trade stocks in tremendous losses till you're blue in the face. That's true, but there is still some regulation there. There's a little bit more than being solely in the collectible space where this occurs. And also, when we look at financial assets, most people don't have an emotional attachment to them. When we're talking any type of collectible, anything that pulls on the nostalgia heartstrings, there's people that are buying this stuff for all the wrong reasons, and they're trying to justify it by claiming it's an investment. I'll just tell you a brief story here. I have several clients that have lost their complete families due to getting in over their head on the collectible scene during the COVID pandemic when prices were at all-time highs. They were getting free money and they were just pumping up comic books, video games, vintage toys. And eventually, when the bottom fell out, obviously their significant other said, "Hey, I want a divorce. I want out of this. This is crazy. You lost, $120,000 in vintage toys. This is insane. Who would stay in a marriage like this?" And I can tell you a story. This is a very interesting story too. I knew a very high profile lawyer who he was married for like 10 years and he had 2 kids and they just had a baby daughter and his house caught fire. And you think this guy's great. He's running back into the house. He didn't realize it at the time. His daughter was in the house. The house was burning. His daughter was in the house. And he went back into the house and you know what he saved? His baseball card collection. Now you can imagine when the dust settled and eventually his daughter was saved. The firemen broke down the door and got the daughter out. But his wife left him. His wife ended up leaving him. She said, "This is ridiculous. Our daughter was in the house that was on fire and you saved the damn great baseball card collection." And she told him right out. She says, "I'm done." She served him divorce papers. He never recovered from that because he will never hear the end of it from his ex-wife. So I think that now that's an extreme story, obviously.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you some people really get in over their head in these markets. And it's like, what are you thinking, dude? A person's life is not more valuable than any object that you can replace, even if it's a one-of-a-kind item. Who cares?
Yeah.
So what do you
It's
say to
interesting.
someone like that?
I don't know if you can, prevent somebody from doing anything if that's their mindset and their operating system. I don't know if there's anything you can do, but yeah, it is crazy and it explains a lot, as far as when I watch your channel and get a sense of where you're coming from. And you made mention, earlier in our conversation just about how I think a lot of times people feel like, well, Shawn, you're just being negative or you're a bad guy. And I think that it's actually coming from a place of trying to really look out for your best interests.
I am often accused that. And one of the things that I tell people is if you would actually read my articles, and this goes to anybody, and actually watch my channel or even interact with me in any way, you don't have to use my services. You can send me an email. I'll most likely respond in kind. But if you see that, I'm actually one of the few people that have collectors' backs. And this goes back to what you had said about sponsorships and that. I can take very few sponsorships on my channel because I'm an independent consultant.
Right.
That's the thing. I'll just mention there are some of the fractional share companies that reached out to me. Whatnot reached out to me. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't even appear on your channel because if I go on Whatnot and I pump up collectibles, it's going to be a conflict of interest for the fact that I offer consulting services." It's even hard for me. Like I would love to do more videos where I show pieces of my collection, but now I'm in this area where like I'll show like a Star Wars proof card from the Kenner Star Wars vintage line, or I'll show something. And now I already know if I show that, well, Reserved Investments is buying it. Obviously, I should invest in that. So it can create problems in the market. It's almost like a form of market manipulation. That's why I kind of pull back from doing videos like that, where every once in a while I'll show something, but I'm very careful the way that I do it. Another prime example, when I showed part of my coins and currency videos. I've done a video on coins and I did one on currency. There were people that were literally writing down the coin, the grade, how it was graded. And they're like sending me emails going, "Well, gee, you have this in your collection. That must mean it would be a good investment." And I just shake my head because in a way they don't understand if everybody's going to the market looking for that coin, obviously that coin's going to start trending up or that banknote. And of course, if I have it in my collection, people are going to automatically think, "Well, Shawn, you did that video. People are going after it. Now you're benefiting. You can easily sell into the market without anyone knowing and you profit from that." So I'm very cautious in doing stuff like that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, well, that's the one where it's like, you know, I think about that type of stuff too when I'll cover certain types of comic books that get really hot. And if I have one, probably should sell it, right now. But at the same time, it's like, well, where's, like, how am I going to sleep at night? Really that comes down to that. It's like, I could do it, but, at the end of the night, I want to get a good night's sleep and I would feel guilty about that stuff. So it is something that you have to ride. And and to further put a point on that, I think what's interesting is that I think sometimes you might find that you get accused of this where you'll talk about the techniques, and in a way it might paint you as like, well, Shawn, you must do that. And it's like, well, the same standard that you hold for yourself is not necessarily the standard that everyone else is going to have, but you're just explaining that, hey, this is probably what people do. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're not wrong at all.
Yeah,
As a
yeah.
matter of fact, I'm very susceptible and very, how do I want to say this, suspect to a lot of people that have other YouTube channels that like pump certain products. It's like, you know that this product is very speculative. Like I'll bring up, I don't know if you ever heard of this card game. It's a collectible card game by the name of MetaZoo.
Oh yeah,
It was
I know that's
pumped
it.
by certain YouTubers, and I remember telling people, "Do not invest in MetaZoo. It is too new, it is too risky, it is not gonna be the next Pokemon." Well, people didn't listen to me, and people lost thousands of dollars. And it's very hard for me to know what I know and teach what I teach, and then I get called either an elitist or I always get accused of this, that I come off very condescending. I'm not trying to be condescending. Like throughout this interview that we just had, I've used the term Timmy's, Kimmies, and Poindexter several times. And people like will come to me and they'll go, "Well, you think that every collector or everybody else is beneath you." That's not what I mean. If you actually do your own research, if you look into these markets, you have what it takes to at least be an average or above average investor speculator in these markets. You don't have to be a Timmy, Kimmy, or Poindexter. That's why I put out the content that I put out on my channel. That's why I write for Antiques and Auction News. Believe me, I am never ever going to get rich from the YouTube algorithm. I'm sure that you can relate for putting out
Yeah.
content. It's obviously a love affair. Now, I do make money, obviously, in other ways. I write for Antiques and Auction News. I'm a consultant. People seek out my advice. But the same advice that I give them is the same advice I put out in my channel. It's just like I've done multiple videos, and I know you probably are aware of this, the optimal collecting grade.
Mhm.
I've done multiple videos where I teach this. That used to be inside knowledge. I want it out there so that people are aware there is a better way if you're investing in established graded collectibles to invest your hard-earned money rather than just looking at either what you can afford or going after the highest graded possible item or comic book or card or whatever it is. Buying the best is not the best advice. I want to make that very clear. And that's what I teach on my channel. So what I try to do is I just try to pull people behind the scenes and show them, if you don't believe me, if you hate me for whatever reason, you think that I'm shady as fuck, whatever, you think that I'm a narcissist, I've been called everything, right? At
I think we
least
all
read,
have on YouTube. Yeah.
yeah, at least read some of the books that I recommend, at least listen to some of the other experts like Harry Rinker. Listen to people who have similar viewpoints, but have been in these markets even longer than me. And you're going to see they're much more bearish on investing in collectibles than I am. I'm at least in the middle where I put
Mm.
my money where my mouth is. I have 20 to 30% of my net worth in antiques and collectibles in an investment manner. A lot of these other people are like, I just do this for fun. You cannot invest in these markets. They think that I'm too bullish on these markets.
Mm.
So that's why it's very interesting, the dual dichotomy that I encounter. Like other experts in the trade, they'll read my articles for Antiques and Auction News and they'll reach out and they'll be like, "Man, you are way too bullish on collectibles." Then on my channel, I get attacked by collectors. "You are completely negative. You're bearish. You don't know what you're talking about." It's like I can't find a happy medium.
Maybe that means that you're actually exactly calling it like it is. That you're
I don't
exactly in
know.
the middle, you know? If you get 50-50 from both sides, like that's how I always feel when people say that, "Oh, Swaggle you're being a CGC shill." And then when other people say, "Swaggle you're being so negative to CGC," I'm like, I think I'm actually perfect where I am right now. If I'm getting half from each side of the audience.
It's possibly true. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think about that line of hype within collectibles. I don't know, have you seen the King of Collectibles, that Netflix show with
Yes.
Golden Auctions? And
Yeah, I
and
did
and, you
watch
know,
that.
other things like Pawn Stars and stuff, but, I guess that the King Collectibles is the most recent one. And it's the most interesting one because obviously it relates to a lot of what we talked about with auction houses and stuff. Where is that line for you? Or how does a show like that operate where obviously they're trying to get people excited and to a degree, if you step back, it's also okay. Like, it's okay to be like, wow, what a cool comic book or baseball card. And wow, it sold for $1 million. Like, that's cool too. It's fun.
Mhm.
But where's the ethics within something like that?
Well, the first thing I want to say, if you're truly investing in these markets, it's quite boring. Let's be realistic. You're going to the
Mm,
market. The exciting part is bidding it up on Heritage or Comic Link or, whatever your favorite auction site is, getting it for the right price. Then you get it home, and what do? You either put it on the wall, like you have some behind you, or if you're me, you take it to a safety deposit box and it just sits there.
yeah.
My first problem with King of Collectibles is it makes it seem like these markets are so exciting. Everybody is gung ho. Again, that has the day trader mentality. That's more for the average armchair antique expert, like American Pickers, Pawn Stars, where they're constantly dealing in this stuff. I often tell people I deal in this stuff every single day. It's very boring to me for the most part. That's why like there's people that want me to do videos like inside reserved investments. And I'm like, dude, if I ever did like a live stream while I'm like analyzing pieces that I'm gonna bid on in an auction, you guys would be falling asleep. It's like the most boring thing ever to see somebody do that. But further to your point, my problem with shows like King of Collectibles is it's it's really, how do I want to say this? It is unethical in a way because it shows these people and it kind of like almost makes them like gods where they can do no wrong. The people with the money are always making the smart decisions and everybody else is just a bystander. And I will say, I hate to say this because I don't personally know Ken Golden. I'm going to be very honest here. I do know other auctioneers I've met many times. Dan Morphy of Morphy Auctioneers out of Adamstown, Pennsylvania. And he was already in a show called, I think it was $1 Million Auctions. You can look that up. I think it's still, you can stream it, I think, on Amazon Prime, I believe. I believe it is out there. And he did a similar show. And the thing that I can't get past is the outright egotism and narcissism. Where like these guys have all the power and they always hype up the items. They hype up the people that are coming to them. And it's something that's a little sickening to me. Because if you really know these people in the trade, I hate to say it for the most part, yeah, they live fascinating lives in certain instances, but for the most part, they're really boring people. Even myself, I talk that about myself in this manner too. I'm not exactly this exciting person either. But my problem is with a lot of these shows, it's all egotism and narcissism. I mean, if you don't believe me, even let's just take American Pickers. Watch the first season of American Pickers. Now watch it now. You can see how different it is. The first season of American Pickers, like the first and second season, were perfect. They would go bang on the door. No one knew who the hell they were. They would have doors slammed in their face. They would have guns drawn on them. They would have people screaming, "Get off my property. You're here to take advantage of me." Now in 2024, Mike Wolf shows up with antique archaeology. I'm going to be on TV. Come right in, buy my stuff. It's all for sale. I'll cut you a deal. When's this going to air? Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how to explain it. It's no longer real. Reality TV in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's just, it's so fake. And I try to tell that to people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know Ken Golden. I've had some interactions with him. Most recently, I covered a few comic sales that happened on Golden auctions that sold for, in some cases, 20x the fair market value. Now, I just asked the question. That seems weird. What do you guys think? And what I heard from them was that, hey, their show is just so hot and so exciting that someone would want to pay 20x for a Wolverine limited series #1. But to me, I think that's interesting that it's like, okay, so if that's what happened, you're saying to me that you are that proud that your customers spend 20x on a book that they could buy
Correct.
on eBay, literally right now.
It's free
Um,
hype. It's free hype. I tell people, don't buy into the hype. You sell
yeah,
into the hype. You buy when you're level-headed, when you're patient, when you've done the research, when prices are, flatlining or they're
yeah,
realistic prices, like in a range. You
right.
do your research, you have a range, you know what you're going to pay for it, then you buy. If somebody wants to pay more, man, I'm not going to lie to you. Going back to ethics, during the graded video game bubble, I even used to tell people on this channel, hey, I'm selling into the hype, guys. I'm not buying this stuff.
Yeah,
Okay. and I did well. Do I feel sorry knowing that somebody potentially bidded on one of those items? They paid a premium. I got the check. I invested it in financial assets, and now they're left with an item that they may have paid $10,000, $20,000 for, where if they go to consign it, they might get 4 or 6 for it. That's the risk of investing in antiques and collectibles. That's why I warn people about this.
Right.
It's not guaranteed.
Last thing I'm just curious before I let you go, thank you for taking the time, is you mentioned it earlier about PSA kind of coming in. And I think a lot of people who watch my specific YouTube channel are very interested in where this goes as far as like comic book grading is concerned. Because like you said, CGC has never really had a competitor. CBCS is there and, they do their thing, but I don't think anyone would say that it's ever been too big of a rivalry between the two. But with PSA coming in, and frankly, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but like, I mean, as far as like, their company is concerned and the amount of volume that they do and the finances behind them, I think PSA is a lot bigger than CGC. What do you think about them coming into comic books?
I'm going to say something controversial. I actually like PSA for card grading. I think they are probably one of the top tier, if not the top card grading company. So I think that they have a lot of good going on behind them. I know there have been controversies with card trimming, the whole 9 yards. Please, in the comment section, I am well aware of all the controversies that have happened to all these grading companies. You don't need to remind me. But what I'm saying overall, PSA does have a very good reputation. The problem is CGC has a 20+ year start in this market. There are now probably millions of comic books graded by CGC. So that has to be said. That means something, especially that CGC had credibility for all of these years. And again, I know CGC has had their fair share of scandals as well. But with that being said, all that out of the way, PSA has their work cut out for them. It is very hard for even an established grading company to come into a market that has been dominated for decades by one such company and take away the edge. Competition is great for markets. I'm not against that. As long as they use a similar grading scale, they're not trying to confuse the market, as long as they're very clear in their attention, as long as their grading label is just as detailed as CGC's, no problem there. But where I think they're going to have a problem is CGC has a lock due to the CGC registry. There's already a lot of dealers, auction houses that are really, really on board with CGC. See, this is the mistake that everybody makes. If you're going to form a grading company, and this goes back to private equity and lack of transparency in these markets. If you're going to form a grading company, you need to get the auction companies on board with you. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize. Is PSA going to be able to call up Heritage, to call up Golden, to call up even Sotheby's and Christie's and say, hey, we're grading comic books now. Do you want a piece of this? When everybody knows who CGC is. All these big boys already play with CGC. I guarantee you, if you have a raw comic book collection and you can sign it to Heritage, Heritage is going to go through it and they're going to go, hey, we should grade this. They're going to send it to CGC. Because what we don't know, the big unknown here, is what multiples are these comic books going to sell from? If CGC gets a certain level of value in the marketplace, is PSA going to even be able to match that? Because that's what's going to be interesting, because it's going to really be a problem for some of these sellers if their items, if their comic books are graded by PSA and they're consigning them to auction and 90% of the books in that auction are graded by CGC. A lot of times what happens in the beginning, at least, the buyers are going to be looking for a deal on those PSA graded books because CGC is the standard. So that's where the great unknown is. It's going to take years for them to infiltrate the market, and it's going to be up to not only, like I said, collectors no longer run the ship. It's going to be our dealers going to respond positively to PSA. Are the auction houses going to respond positively to PSA? Or are they going to be like, hey, you guys grade coins. You do great in coins. We're not touching you for comic books. So again, it comes down to the auction companies, the dealers. It's not really up to the collectors.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think my outlook on them has been certainly they're going to be successful with their own sort of ingrained audience and collector base. I'm sure that they'll be able to get a footing in modern comic books. Sending a Jim Lee X-Men one is no big deal, to PSA. But what is it going to take for somebody to send their Action Comics one? But Shawn, thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. I highly recommend everybody check out that article, which I'll definitely have a link in the description, where
Mhm.
you go into detail about transparency within grading companies and auction houses, as well as private equity coming into the space. Shawn, where can the people find you or get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and what you do?
Sure. My YouTube channel is called Reserved Investments, obviously. You can also email me at reservedinvestments@gmail.com. And I do write for Antiques and Auction News on a biweekly basis. My articles are usually uploaded online, www.antiquesandauctionnews.net. So that is where you can find me. If you do want to interact with me, if you want to schedule a consulting, even if you just want to email me, because you may be surprised, I do tend to respond to emails that I get hit with. If you just have a question, I will sometimes, time permitting, I usually try to respond to all emails, and that's reserved investments, all one word, at gmail.com. It'll be interesting. There is one thing I do want to say here. It'll be interesting to see what comments you get on this video, because I really enjoyed the last time I had a discussion with you, Mickey. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. And I liked reading the comments too. It was surprising. They weren't all bad. They were mostly positive. I was
No,
surprised.
no, I actually think people are really excited to, hear what you got to say, and I think that they'll definitely enjoy this conversation for sure. And yeah, shout out to the people in the comments down below. Hopefully, it's not too negative, but I think we'll know that if it's half positive, half negative, that means that we were right in our
I'm
conversation.
hitting a chord somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks again, Shawn. We really appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you the next time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.